Om Shanti, good evening. Warm welcome to Interview with Raj Yogi. And tonight our theme is Power of Recognition, part 2 of a series of 3, looking a little bit at sustenance. So we are first going to start with a bit of a reflection, just to get ourselves into the same space, spiritually speaking. As always, we invite you to be seated comfortably. Eyes can be open if you choose to experiment. And although the eyes are open, my focus, my attention is actually turned inwards, looking inwards, experiencing what's going on inside. We have some facility with experiencing what's going on, even in subtle ways, with the body. So I can experience from the inside of the body the heartbeat or the breath, or if there's any muscular tension. It's not just things outside the body that we experience. And the same holds for the non-physical. I can experience things going on inside of my mind. They're not physical or visible, but they're very real in that they create an experience for me. I can experience my own inner state. Is it peaceful and calm? Is it anxious, confused, restless? And I can experience seeing the invisible. For example, the self. I, the living being, the soul, me, I'm not physically visible. The body I can see with these physical eyes, but to experience myself, I look through a bit of an inner eye. I can experience my own activity that I am thinking or remembering or decision making. It's all not physical, but I can experience it. And I can experience the qualities of the self, the very deep qualities at the core of my being, that quality of peace, as if it's as real as anything outside in the physical world. I have this remarkable capacity to see and experience what isn't physical, but is very real, does exist. Om Shanti. And as if by magic, our interviewer has appeared. I think that is being stretched. If you can move the charger. It's caught on the chair. Yeah, thank you. Yes, our interviewer has magically appeared. She is very real. She was invisible, and you might have experienced her before she physically appeared, but here she is. All right. Do you need this?
No, I can do it. Om Shanti, good evening. Thank you for your patience with our little technical details here and there. So welcome back to Interview with Raj Yogi. This is part 2. If you weren't here last week, our topic is the power of recognition. And so our first session last week was really what is recognition? How is it relevant in life, but also within the context of what this study is really about. So it's a very powerful topic, and we're going to explore a few things today in terms of what, in terms of the importance of the power recognition. Why is sustaining it so essential? I think it's something that sometimes we just keep going and doing anything, whatever we're focusing on. What is that relationship between the power of recognition and sustaining? And while Judy shares, I'm going to turn on the mic.
I was reminded of a very interesting quote today. It's from a motivational speaker, probably one of the best that has ever existed, I suppose, Zig Ziglar. And it was around motivation. And what he was sharing was that some will share, they'll say, my motivation doesn't seem to last. I'll have a moment where I'm really strongly motivated, and then the next day it's not as strong, it starts to flag. And he said, well, motivation's a bit like bathing. You don't just bathe once for your entire life. Ideally, you do it daily right, to stay fresh. And the same with motivation. It's not that, in that moment when I'm so motivated and I feel so determined and I recognize this is what I have to do, I want to do, I love to do. It'd be so great if I did it. And it's very strong at that moment. But it's not going to, like bathing, it's not going to last until there's really not even just daily, but quite frequently a practice of what we call revising it. And we say the same thing with promises. Some people say, oh, I can't keep a promise, so I'm not going to make any. But at the time that we make a promise, it feels so real to us, as if it's eternal, as if it could last forever. It feels so strong. And I think at that moment, it's very authentic and genuine. It's not that we're inauthentic, it is at that moment. The question is, how am I going to keep that alive? Because I'm on a journey towards realizing that promise, a journey towards fulfilling that recognition. So I need to sustain what seems very real in that instant. I need to sustain it. So I think minimally it has to be recognized when it comes to recognition. It has to be that this is something that needs to be sustained, just as that quote was saying about motivation, revised quite regularly. The meaningfulness of it, making that very clear for the self.
It's interesting. I was actually thinking about this topic today inadvertently, but would you say that recognition has a lot to do with the part of the seed of the study? We could, in terms of sometimes maybe we do a lot of planning and structuring things, and kind of seem to leave recognition on the wayside. You're already in the thick of, the momentum of whatever it is that you've endeavored to do. In this, of course, in this context, we're talking about practicing soul consciousness, practicing these deep essential ingredients of Raja Yoga.
It's kind of a funny thing because, yes, I need to sustain recognition, but also the recognition will be what sustains me. It's sort of a funny
You kind of like
situation.
put in the
so,
part of the topic we're going to go to.
so if there isn't the recognition there, then whatever I am embarking on will not be sustainable. I have to protect that recognition, but yes, it needs to start with recognition. In this case, we're using the example of recognizing I am a soul. The entire spiritual journey is going to rest on that recognition. In fact, I have to recognize I am spirit to make a spiritual journey. So if that recognition isn't there, yes, I may not be feeling it. In fact, the entire journey is to recognize, oh, yes, I am a soul. I don't feel it right now, but I know I am a soul. I know I am. And then the entire journey actually is to get to the point of becoming. that experience, living that recognition. And so we even talk of it like a sandwich. There's a slice of bread at the beginning of the sandwich, and then all the filling, and then the other slice of bread. And the two slices of bread are the same bread. I say, oh, yes, I'm a soul at the beginning of the study. I recognize it. And I go through all of these interesting experiences. All of the non soul conscious things kind of have to come out and take leave. And then at the end, I basically say the exact same thing. I'm a soul, but now it is reality, complete reality. So if that first slice of bread isn't there, I'm never going to make it through the filling. So I need to have that recognition at the beginning. It's what's going to create a sustainable journey. But I also need to keep reminding me, sustaining that recognition along the way.
How do you sustain it?
I think that, it was funny, we were talking about this today, that um, we stick with things that are what we call meaningful, or we get some attainment from. We stick. That's the carrot that keeps us going, is that sense that there's some kind of attainment. So part of recognizing I'm a soul is that I have to recognize the significance of that. We give it in the courses. You're a point of light in the center of the forehead. You're not physical. Great. But so what? What does that mean? Why would I want to go into that experience? Um, how will that change things? What will that create? How will that make things different? And it's actually the same when we talk about God. We say, recognize God is my Father, God's incorporeal. But then what's the attainment? And those actually have to be inseparable. We call it the inheritance, that Father and inheritance are inseparable. Similarly, soul and capacities are inseparable. So when I say I am a soul, everything I have been searching for outside, I can experience and find in soul consciousness. There are huge attainments. Now, I can tell you that, but you have to recognize it for yourself so that that carrot is always dangling in front. I want to become soul conscious because everything I really want in life is in that point. So I want it. That has to be clear in what we call the intellect. I have to have realized or recognized not just I'm a soul, but what's the attainments of being a soul? What's the capacities? What's in it for me in being soul conscious? That has to be recognized too. And for me, it was very interesting. I know Nora's heard this story. It was a little surprising to me because I really went in naive and just open and maybe like some a little skeptical. Is this a cult? I don't know. So I remember lesson one, hearing that I am a soul. And a couple of things happened, but the one that's so strong is when I heard you are a soul, there was some strange translation from those words into attainment that happened inside. So that what I actually experienced was, finally, this is a place where you can get self respect. I heard you are a soul, but what I experienced or the attainment was self respect. And to me, self respect, when I looked honestly at all the activity in all my life, everything I'd been doing out there was seeking self respect. So if I can get it all in soul consciousness, I'm highly motivated. And whenever I feel things are getting numb or I'm losing the point or thread, I go back. It's so grounding. It's an anchor to me. I am doing all of this, trying to become soul conscious, doing it all because it's the only way I realize, I recognize to get self respect. There is everything else is external validation, and that's not self respect. So, and that to me is the greatest. That's like gold. That's like diamond. You have two choices. You can move through life without self respect, or you can go through life with self respect. And you can probably figure out what each is going to look like or feel like. So that's the attainment came to life when I heard those words. And the other thing I experienced was in hearing soul consciousness, it articulated what I think deep down we all know. I think children definitely know, but it really articulated, wait a minute, I don't think I am all these, like, who am I really inside? I must be more than just, the language I speak or the people I know. And it articulated very clearly that big picture, that deep sense of who we are.
So for yourself, I mean, it was. I feel that from what you're sharing, it was quite profound,
Mm.
and and that's one of the things that it's one can observe. What I've seen in different professions or endeavors of trying to do something, a project or whatnot, but specifically in this study, one of the things I've definitely observed is being able to keep going.
Mm-hmm.
And so for yourself, and I think that that's the intent of the interview, the Raj Yogi, you, the Raj Yogi, is practically speaking, how have you kept yourself going? Like,
Yeah.
do you revisit that moment? Um, that was, it seems like it was a very clear connection. How do you keep yourself going so that you don't lose the point? Because one of the things in the study is to look at yourself, and we can sometimes get kind of microscopic and get disheartened.
Yeah. I think
Mhm.
we saw it with Brahma Baba, and it's something that I was pulled to do myself. I don't know whether that was the effect of seeing that example, but to look at again what happens at the beginning of one's journey is quite critical. And you might say, oh my gosh, that didn't happen to me. Well, it's never too late to go
Mm.
back and revisit that. So we often have a joke here. I'm not sure when my spiritual birth was or when my journey began. I always appreciate when souls are honest and don't just peg it to when they took the course. It could be years later because they might have gone back and okay, now I really, maybe before that was all just preparation. It's not wasted time, preparation to come to that honest moment. So rather than the word meditation, this idea of honest conversations with the self based on exposure to truth. And we saw this with Brahma Baba that at the beginning of his spiritual study, he had a very strong recognition that seemed independent of anything around him. So we say God inspired, but a very strong recognition of who he was. It was a very honest moment, I think, who he was, what his capacities are, what he was destined to do, what he really was compelled to do. That was very strong and extremely personal and meaningful to him. So I found at the beginning of my spiritual journey, these conversations, you can call it meditation if you want, but these conversations with myself that I have, well, okay, let's say the Brahma Kumaris don't exist. God does not exist. I'm the only person on the planet who is listening to this stuff. Um, what are you trying to do here with your life? Like, what is most important to you? And if this answer is the same over and over again, I've got to restore that self-respect. I've got to, that single thing that's just so meaningful and powerful to the self that's really kind of independent of everything, including God and the Brahma Kumaris. I know that sounds a little sacrilegious, but that means it's not, there's not a trace, not even a tiny 0.0001% trace of show in any of this. This is my life depends on this kind of conversation. There is no show, there's no comparing, there's no that one's doing it, so I should. There's none of that because you strip all of it away and say, just between me and myself, what what am I doing with my life? What do I feel is most important? And if what the Brahma Kumaris are offering and what God is offering agrees with that, you're in the right place and you'll probably do very well. Because many, as we'll look at next week, many challenges will come and what will enable me to overcome that. So it's important to have a very powerful moment at the beginning to sustain the journey. and to keep revising. It becomes, we use the word sustaining or revising. It actually is my anchor. When I am completely unaware of what I'm doing or where what's going on, or as you say, so much expansion that you lose the point, that is the point. That moment of knowing why I'm doing this, that is the point. And actually, at the very beginning of my spiritual study in the first few years, I don't know why I was pulled to, I had the access to them. I was in a fitness facility, so I had a lot of these kinds of souls around, was long distance runners, marathon runners. I was really, because it intrigued me. They have to sustain this thing over a long period of time, that marathon. And I know they get tired. I know physiologically their body is depleted and beginning to go into stores, basically eat itself. So how are they sustaining that? How are they? And there was a couple of interesting things that many would say. First off, they say it's a spiritual experience for them, and that they almost start to feel like they're observing themselves. They go into this very free, light place that's, yeah, quite peaceful, actually. It's quite interesting that. But also, the reason I was interviewing them or asking them, I say, there must come a time when you would like to just lie down and have a nice nap, right? They're exhausted, especially ultra marathoners. And I say, the question must come up, why am I doing this? And you must have a really good answer, and they all had some reason that was at the beginning of it all. Why? It's very different for each one, but it had to be personally meaningful. It cannot be someone else's reason. It cannot be cultural pressure. It has to come from your own heart. Why am I doing this? Is it something I would die for, in the sense that, do I feel it is essential for quality of life for me to do this? So that it has to be that strong, that personal. Nothing can destroy it. It has to be indestructible, as if it's really in your bones. So that's a very important conversation to have with oneself at the beginning, because it will sustain one to recognize why I'm doing this.
What have you observed in terms of the impact when that, now we're talking about in the context of sustaining your efforts. So, what have you discovered the impact when that recognition is vibrant in terms of your efforts, in terms of perhaps maybe how you faced all these things that you know that need to change inside of yourself?
One thing that is very important, super important on this journey, we call it the intellect. And it's often called the feet by which you walk on this spiritual journey. And the intellect is actually responsible for recognition, just as my physical body has these physical eyes. And I'm sure you can appreciate how important vision is. Even who someone who's physically blind, they have a vision. Either they have a companion, or they use a stick, or their other senses are heightened. They still have to see what's going on. Vision, seeing, is super important as we move through the world. I think you can experience that. Just try walking around with your eyes closed, and I think you'll see how important it is. The same applies spiritually, that my intellect, this inner eye that can see, has insight, can see with clarity. Often it can get fogged. We say they were blinded by their anger, or blinded by lust. It can get blinded by these things. I have discovered that this capacity to see, the intellect, works better when that driving force is very vibrant, as you asked, when that reason I'm doing it, when that connection to, in my case, self-respect, that soul consciousness is self-respect, that God is completely dedicated to restoring my self-respect, when that all is very vibrant inside of me, my intellect works so well. It's as if I've opened up a whole new world. Like the way people might be acting, I see in a completely different way. The daily lesson that we read in the mornings, I hear in a completely different way. So we often say that, when you expose yourself to things through soul consciousness, we even use a term with your third eye open, you will see and experience things in a very different way. So, if soul consciousness for me is connected to the attainment of self respect, in other words, that's what makes it come to life. When that's alive, that experience of that purity, that self respect, which is soul consciousness, then my third eye works very differently. And therefore, it's really helping me to move along. It's really sustaining the spiritual journey because, again, it's the feet that move me forward. So when we're moving through the world, you can check tomorrow as you're walking along, is it your physical feet or is it your vision that's driving, guiding you? I think it's our vision, actually, right? It's not just our feet. Our vision is telling our feet where to go. So similarly, that inner eye is really sustaining, guiding the journey, and you want it to work well. It works best when I'm soul conscious, and I know I am because the self respect is so vibrant.
You hear often that we're really good at creating things, not very good at sustaining things. I know my friend shared this
Mm.
last week, and we're definitely not very good at finishing things, completing projects. So this resistance, and not for us to go into the depths of what it is, but it seems like we don't think too much about that there is resistance, or we identify, or we don't identify the right seed to try to sustain things. So why is there this resistance in terms of targeting, oh, it's my recognition. I mean, like I'm getting bored or other things are, telling me that, I don't have time or I don't know what I'm doing. And I don't think many would say, oh, it's my power recognition. I need to really focus on that.
Mm.
I think it's more like, oh, there could be other things. It's like, oh, I better just try harder, or I better just try to catch up with somebody else and how they're doing, or I just have to focus more on one particular practice. You can sort of lose a thread that way.
Yeah, I know this might be bleeding a little bit into next week as well, but we heard a funny thing today that someone can be surrounded by completely pure, really good, nutritious food, and they're still in the corner eating junk food. So, what we have to recognize this resistance is a deep addiction to old habits, to the status quo, to the old or the past. In fact, one of the lessons we often are trying to unpack is how to detach our heart, not just our mind, but our heart from the old. So we have a deep habit of being sustained by other things. And again, we can just use the example of food, which is also a form of sustenance. So I'm sure you can appreciate that if you're used to eating certain things, but for you suddenly realize, oh my God, I'm going to die. Like there's some serious health concerns if I keep eating this way. I've got to shift my diet. So you're strongly motivated, right? I'm going to die. I'm strongly motivated. Still, that addiction to those old foods, that old sustenance can rear its head every once in a while. So again, we're authentic. It's not that we're inauthentic, but we need to be aware of what forces will be at work. So the old forms of sustenance, and it gets very tricky when you're starting to talk about name, fame, these subtle, subtle aspects of body consciousness. We were sustained by body consciousness. Our sense of value was sustained by things that actually, ironically, stripped our value, but we couldn't see. So those habits keep creeping in and competing with, okay, I'm trying to be sustained now by real value, internal, intrinsic value, which is fueled by that connection to God. I'm trying to be sustained by that, but the pull of that old sustenance, my familiarity with it, the ease. I know exactly how to get it. I know how to manipulate people so they like me. I keep trying to go into that old sustenance. So again, the clarity needs to be, and it takes time. I think we have to be so patient in and gaining experience on all of this. And the funny thing is, just when we feel, okay, I totally get it now, I see how I was deceived, it reinvents itself. Even though it's old, it keeps reinventing itself so that we don't recognize it again. It's a bit like you know, a villain in a movie, and at first I see what it looks like. I remember there was one plot line where in the movie the villain actually had this technology where he could create a face that looked like a friend, that looked like you, that yourself, and it really it was perfect. It was a funny kind of material, and you're like, this is horrible. Like, you'll be so easily deceived that this is the real thing, right? So I have to have a really good working intellect, really good sensitivity to feel this is counterfeit. This is not true value. But old forms of sustenance will keep pulling us.
It's very related to my next question. Actually, we had a beautiful session with a student from Turkey,
Mm,
and it was really all authenticity.
mm,
And for those who have heard of what happens when you first become a student of anything, you first start training, you're like, you want to do everything right. But then when you continue, we kind of tend to like to cut corners,
mm.
and we're a little bit more careless, perhaps, in terms of wanting to, follow whatever the instructions, to be able to do it right. And this is really connected to sustaining, because when you start to go on an endurance, even for runners, how to maintain a certain kind of alignment as they run. How do you feel that the power of recognition, sustaining that, is related to the authenticity of how I study Raja Yoga?
Yeah, this. I know this sounds like it keeps coming back to the same place, self-respect. But again, thinking of the example of Brahma Baba and our senior students, which we call the daddies, I always was really touched when Daddy Janki, Daddy Prakashmani would write a letter to the global family. And at the end of it, she would sign it BK Janki, not Daddy Janki, but just BK, godly student. And what you felt, it was a really strong signal to me. What you felt was the humility. Again, freedom from ego, that self respect. Humility means self respect, there's no ego. And I have noticed that souls that are able to sustain that stage, um, they constantly have that. They never get that sense of I have mastered this. I'm good to go. I can. They're always that. They always have that care and that allegiance to the basics, if you will. And even we saw with Sister Mohini, our senior in the region, at one point was saying, yeah, some people say they're surprised to hear I'm still practicing lesson one. It's like I'm still trying to master lesson one. That or that recognition of the profundity of what you're dealing with here. It's quite humbling, actually. And I'm always a little bit nervous when someone say, "Oh yeah, yeah, no, I get the soul conscious, but here's what's going on." I'm like, I'm sorry, but the second half of your sentence indicates you don't get the soul consciousness. We shouldn't ever dismiss the basics, that humility, that recognition of the importance, the depth of those basics. If that recognition isn't there, then I will get careless. But those who have been able to keep going on this journey have this humility that from that recognition of the basics, as we say, this study is upside down, and that the most advanced, most powerful lessons are at the beginning. And not keen to rush through, it's not advancing at all. To really appreciate This soul consciousness is no small thing. I can never, I don't know, we used to see definitely from the seniors till their last breath, they're practicing soul consciousness and inspiring us to do so. So definitely saw that with Brahma Baba because he recognized how deep these lessons were, how powerful and profound. He didn't become careless, which is a function of ego. Actually, he never became careless with the practice, and because of not being careless, he was able to be sustained. Can you imagine if a surgeon, I've been doing surgery for 30 years, I think I'll take some shortcuts on this next operation. That's ridiculous. We never want them. We always want the highest quality care in that operation. Now, this is an operation I'm doing on myself. I don't think we want to cut corners. I think we want to be very careful that I am doing this as authentically, as honestly as I can. So there is this humility, this natural humility, when I recognize really the value of what seems like a very simple thing, and I recognize the depth of it.
Thank you for sharing. It's such a powerful topic, and it's very much connected to what we'll cover next week. Actually, our third part, and if those who have joined us, if you have questions, I know we're actually coming to a close right now, but you can send your questions through email as well. But sustaining the study, I would find, is probably something I've noticed that many students who would come back and take the course, that they find themselves, just something else seemed to be, it would sidetrack me all the time, and perhaps forgetting, yeah, forgetting the experience that, or maybe didn't even realize what it was. Can I take the time to do that? And so we're going to share a few more moments of a little reflection before we end. And so thank you for those for joining.
As I'm seated here, completely absorbed in my own thoughts, my own reflection, I do notice that the awareness, the experience of the body naturally fades away as I become absorbed inside. And I'm really trying to focus in, sharpen the focus rather than check out, trying to get to the point. When I say to myself, I am a soul, I am a point of light, at some level we must recognize this is important, valuable, perhaps even true. But what is the experience for me when I say I am a soul? What does that imply or mean with respect to my capacities, my life, my heart? To say that I am not anything temporary or limited, and that within me, the soul, is everything connected to quality of life. To go deeply into the point, the meaning, the value of being a soul, far beyond just I am a point of light in the center of the forehead. What is the experience, the attainment of being a soul? Taking time, as much time as I need, to go into that experience. Very personal, no show, very honest reflection with the self. Perhaps one that might very deeply and permanently connect me to the worth of the self. Om Shanti.
Om Shanti. Thank you, Judy, for taking us into that experience. Next week, we will be looking at this topic called finishing power. And I think sometimes it's actually all connected, lose the point. And what's the point of Raja Yoga?
Mm.
What's the point? Is there anything that is relevant to breaking cycles and this ultimate, actually, this vicious cycle of thinking that I am physical? And I wonder if souls even think if it's even possible in a very subconscious way. So please join us again next week and for our third part of our session about the power of recognition. I'm going to hand it over to Judy now in terms of upcoming sessions. Thank you for joining.
And thank you, Nora.
Thank you, Judy.
And thank you, of course, to those who are watching. Very much appreciate you joining these sessions and always, always welcome your feedback. So the days are just rolling into each other, aren't they? So what we have coming up next week or this week on Thursday, we'll be doing Experience again at 6:45 to 7:30. 7:35, an interview format, but going deeply into the essence, the basic lessons of Raj Yoga. So it's great if you haven't taken the course, or even if you have, to get a chance to go quite deeply into what those basic principles or lessons are. And so you're welcome to join. And of course, we try to keep everything on our YouTube site, BK Calgary, all the experience sessions, the interview sessions, so you can go back if you choose. Again, thank you for joining and wishing you a very beautiful evening. Om Shanti.